हेलो ऑल, दिस इज चरवाक लोकायत। मैं हूं चरवाक लोकायत। सभी दोस्तों का स्वागत करता हूं एंड आई एम चरवाक लोकायत वेलकमिंग यू ऑल फॉर टुडेस स्पेशल लाइव स्ट्रीम विद आवर गेस्ट. His name is Dag Herbjørnsrud. So I mean slightly difficult to pronounce, but I hope it makes sense. Now, just a brief introduction. He is a historian of ideas, author, a former editor-in-chief, and founder of Center for Global and Comparative History of Ideas in Oslo. And his writings have been published by the American Philosophical Association, Dialogue and Universalism, and Cosmopolis. And he was formerly a columnist of Al Jazeera English. So he's a very reputed person. He's an historian of ideas, so that gives a fair amount of background. And he has written a book called Global Knowledge, and in an essay on the blog of, and he has also written blogs for Journal of the History of Ideas. And he has covered various topics from, you say, global intellectual history, philosophy of ancient Egypt, the Battle of Vienna, the women philosophers, to Eurocentrism, and so forth. So very I mean it's a great privilege to have him here in this platform. तो दोस्तों लाइव को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा शेयर कीजिए, सब्सक्राइब कीजिए चैनल को, क्योंकि हमारे यहाँ जो स्पेशल गेस्ट आए हैं, हमें चाहिए कि उनके व्यूज जाने जाए, उनके बातों को भी समझा जाए एंड उनको मतलब लाया जाए इस पब्लिक में. भारत के लोगों को भारत में जो प्राचीन नास्तिक या एथिस्ट जो परंपराएं रही है, या सेक्युलर वैल्यूज जो पुराने टाइम में रही है, जो मटेरियलिज्म की बातें होती थी, उसके बारे में मतलब ज्यादा उतना रिसर्च नहीं हुआ है. तो आज मैं जिनको यहाँ पे लाने वाला हूँ, उन्होंने बहुत इस पे रिसर्च किया है, बहुत सारे ब्लॉग्स भी लिखे हैं. उनके ब्लॉग के लिंक्स भी मैं डिस्क्रिप्शन में मैं डाल दूंगा, तो वो भी लोग जाके पढ़ सकते हैं. तो फिलहाल मैं उनको यहाँ पे ऐड करने वाला हूँ. लेट्स वेलकम हिम. तो हाय डैग, हाउ आर यू डूइंग? Can you unmute your? Hi, Dad. Yeah, hello. So, yeah.
I'm doing fine.
Can you unmute your? Hi, Dad. Yeah, hello. So, yeah.
I'm doing fine.
Can you unmute your? Hi, Dad. Yeah, hello. So, yeah.
So it's a little bit echo here.
Can you unmute your? Hi, Dad. Yeah, hello. Can you close the window? Actually, I mean, there is a double voice coming, echoing, double voice. Can you close the window? There is a double voice coming somewhere.
Yeah, here we are.
Yeah, you can close the other.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
just
really sorry.
Be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, now it's fine. Now it's fine. Now it's fine.
We are back. It's my mistake, and there was a double window open. So thank you so much for inviting me and having me here. It's really great.
Yeah, and guys, let me share the link as well. This is the website.
Yeah. So actually, yes, I have written this text for the American Philosophical Association, and I'm talking about Charvaka or Lokayata, and it's a text in two pieces, so to say.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you kind of pop it up in the chat here. But
yeah, I've just this one is there. I've pointed out the highlight. Yeah, but guys, here is the introduction. तो इन्होंने अभी जो भी कहा है, ये आर्टिकल लिखे हैं भारत के प्राचीन एथिज्म के ऊपर, मटेरियलिज्म के ऊपर. तो ये इस वेबसाइट का लिंक है. यू कैन डायरेक्टली गो इनटू द वेबसाइट एंड यू गेट टन्स ऑफ टॉपिक. बहुत सारे टॉपिक है. आप उनमें से इन्होंने टॉपिक 2 पार्ट में लिखा है ऑन चरवाक एंड लोकायत. इट्स अ 2 पार्ट ब्लॉग. सो आप वहां जाके भी पढ़ सकते हैं इसको इंग्लिश में.
Right, exactly. And
I request people who are watching the live to share this live so that the maximum audience can come and join and have questions if possible in the chat. But yeah, it would be preferable if more audience can come, because this is more of a productive session just to know about, in brief, how the history of ideas, history of philosophy has progressed in India and the world.
yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah. Yeah, Amit Malik is saying hello, Mr. Dag and Charvaka. So he's another of our member from India, and he's saying, yeah. So I just request people to share this live and get more of people. Yeah, yeah. So I have a one question just to, despite the given that high profile you hold and you run an organization called Center for Global Ideas, History, and you know, Center for Global and Comparative History of Ideas. So
Right.
can we know the purpose of it? I mean, the real purpose of what it tries to achieve.
Right. Okay. So, as a global historian of ideas, I write about different topics when it comes to especially philosophy, but also history of ideas, things that have been written. So that's what I mostly do. Texts. So I do, for example, Chinese philosophy literature. I've written about African philosophy, like Sarah Jacob, and ancient philosophy and thinking from Egypt and Mesoamerica, as you mentioned in the introduction. Thank you very much. So, and the idea is, so to say, to bring forward ideas that are not that well known throughout the world, you know. So, for example, when it comes to, let's say, Indian thinking, and that's why I made this article for the American Philosophical Association. And it has been peer reviewed by 5 people, both in India, in Europe, and one in North America. And so the idea was that, most people know that India has very many religions, but this material and this naturalistic and this atheist, secular, rational part of Indian thinking, it's not that, how to say, well known throughout the world. So I wrote this mostly for Americans and Europeans and other non-Indians, but I did also find some parts that I hope can be interesting also for an Indian audience, because I try to widen the scope a little bit. So first of all, I start earlier when it comes to the Charvakas and the Lokayatas. I start earlier than what is most common. So I start actually during the Harappa culture, around 2,000 years before the Common Era. That means 4,000 years ago. And I have at least some examples from that era before the Vedas, right? And then I continue throughout the Rig Vedas and the Upanishads. And I also continue, how to say, into the more recent times. For example, when it comes to Akbar and in the 1500s, and I have several examples that I have found based on, how to say, the best scholars that we have, and trying to, tie this all together and make it into the modern era with Pula as well, and the Dalit movement. So that's a wider scope when it comes to the time era, so to say. And then the second part, which I tried to do in this text, is to also widen the scope in a more geographical sense. So I don't only study the North Indian proof that we have of the Charvakas, but also South Indian examples that I do have. We can come back to that, and from Tibet as well, and not to say the least, actually also in China. So I found a rather recent example, or a scholar that's from the 1978, actually, and he found dozens of examples how Charvakas and Lokayatas, how they were imported, so to say, along with the Buddhist scriptures from the 500s, 600s, 700s in China. And I also have in this text example of on how the Europeans were influenced by this rational and atheist thinking from the 1580s in the court of Akbar. And how that possibly can explain why the Europeans started to discuss similar thinking, in the 17 and the 1800s as well. For example, David Hume. And we can come back to that as well. And the third, how to say, dimension, so to say, that I have in the text is I try to expound, is when it comes to the scientific inquiry in India. So I delve a little bit into Aryabhata, for example, who is renowned Indian scholar who wrote in the 400 and approximately 98, 99 his main work, and how he was compared to Brahmagupta. But Aryabhata, there are reports, at least if we also read al-Biruni, this Persian scholar, who lived, more than 500 years later, and he wrote also about this Charvaka thinking of Aryabhata. So there is a wide discussion, and it is today, and it has been for decades and centuries and millennia. And while I'm at it, and I just want to mention that I am, of course, very indebted to scholars like Ramakrishna Bhattacharya.
Ramakrishna Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Shukriya. In Kolkata. So I have read his works and I refer to his works, and Krishna del Toro, a younger scholar. And while I'm at it, I just want to, of course, mention this philosophy book by Radha Krishna from 1929. So I quote him as well when it comes to this topic. And of course, we also have this this one from this collection from the 1950s.
Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay.
Exactly. So that's some of the sources and books, and I try to, how to say, knit it together a little bit. So I can go on and on here, of course, but I would like, maybe we can give a little bit, how to say, simple introduction as well, because I think that many English speakers, non-Indians at least, they are not too familiar with this.
That's I'll translate it. So अभी इन्होंने कहा है, इनका एक आर्टिकल है, 2 आर्टिकल, मैं उन दोनों आर्टिकल्स का लिंक डाल दूंगा, ठीक है. सो द आर्टिकल जो है आपको यहाँ पे मिल जाएगा. लेट मी शेयर द लिंक वंस. सो यहाँ पे सो जो आर्टिकल ये लिखे हैं उसी पे चर्चा है। इन्होंने दो बड़े आर्टिकल लिखे हैं, ये ब्लॉग बोल लीजिए या रिसर्च जो है इन्होंने लिखा है ऑन द मेटीरियलिस्ट फिलॉसफी इन एंशिएंट इंडिया, भौतिकवाद जिससे कहते हैं, या जो मतलब पुनर्जन्म, कर्म सिद्धांत, और जो ईश्वर और मतलब जो स्वर्ग की कल्पना है उन सबको डिनाई करता है, उस पे एक गहरा रिसर्च इनका है। तो मैं ये लिंक शेयर कर देता हूँ, सो आई एम जस्ट शेयरिंग द लिंक, ओके, you can use it as well for reference.
Right.
So indirectly he is just talking about that, okay. And I know people who are, it's mean जो हिंदी में बोलते हैं शायद, जो यूज टू नहीं है इंग्लिश लाइव स्ट्रीम के लिए थोड़ा मुश्किल हो सकता है, बट आई होप आप लाइव को रिवाइंड करके भी देख सकते हैं, यू कैन हियर इट अगेन, रिवाइंड करके देख सकते हैं, कोई सवाल है तो आप पूछ सकते हैं। सो या दैट आई जस्ट मेंशन दैट for a non-English audience may not be easy, but I've told that they can always rewind the live stream or video and try asking question to understand. I just mentioned that. So here is another question. You did mention about Harappan civilization having a materialist ideology or atheistic tendencies. So the
Right.
question is, what was the area of research in this, or why many people don't talk about it? Just can you speak more on it regarding Harappan
Exactly.
civilization?
Yeah, that's very great. Let's start with the beginning. So and for how to say the non-Indians, we might say that the Harappa culture was in the northwestern part of India of today, and in the south eastern part of Pakistan of today, this area. So around Mohenjo-daro in Sindh, for example, that's one of the main areas. And the time era of that's approximately from 2600 until 1900 BCE, before the Common Era. So that means approximately 4,000 years ago. And so what recent research have shown us is that actually this Harappa culture was not religious, at least according to a study by, let's check my notes here if it's okay, Shireen Ratnagar. Shireen Ratnagar. I'm sorry about that misspelling, mispronunciation. So she has.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. She has recently, in a recent study, she has demonstrated how the hundreds of female clay statues at Mohenjo-daro, they were actually, most likely, they were statues of ordinary people. Like, for example, the famous statue of the so-called dancing girl. She was probably not dancing at all. So that was an English scholar 100 years ago who claimed that. But so in Ratnagar, she has rather discovered that actually these statues, they were not religious, because they were, how to say, they were not similar to each other. They were rather distinctive, rather individual compared to each other. And we have found no temples, in the Harappa culture. There are no temples or no signs of worship at all. And that is why also we have another scholar, Wendy Doniger, and let's see, I have her book here as well, just in case. So this is, it might be a little bit, I don't know, discussable book for some, of course, like all are, but this is her book, The Hindus. I would say, while I'm at it, remember that Hindu is a rather modern and new word. in Indian context as well. But anyhow, she writes in her book that these people of the Harappa culture, which is in the Indus Valley, they are also called the Indus Valley civilization, and she argues that they created the world's first secular state. That was a quote, and she writes, could they have been more like proto-atheists than proto-yogis? End of quote. And that was a question. So it's a question, we don't know for sure. So this research is rather ongoing, but at least the main point here is that, I would say there is no proof that they were very religious, and that they could just as well have been, non-religious. And in my text, I go on and try to study what happens when the Aryan-speaking people immigrated into India around the year or around 1500 BCE, 3,500 years ago, approximately. That's what at least most scholars think. There was an immigration of Aryan-speaking people. So what is interesting is that,
sorry to interrupt, Dag.
Discussion.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, thank you.
Here is a question by our mod. He's saying, okay, thanks, Indus Valley civilization से कौन से religion का link है, इसको clear कीजिए. So he's asking, can you please clarify which religion Indus Valley civilization had? Senior, actually, he has already given the answer that it was probably a secular state. It had nothing much to do with religious ideas or, idealisms. Am I correct if I mentioned that?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the point. And I think we should all think a little bit new when it comes to history. And because we can also see something similar in ancient Egypt. I have studied, or I have written about that as well. And we have a text from approximately 1200 BCE. It is called, the text, the name of the text, which is it's Be a Writer. It is known as that, Be a Writer. And that text is also very, how to say, worldly, connected to material thinking. It argues in a little bit similar way, like the Lokayatas, at least like the agnostics. It argues like that, there is no point in worrying about the afterlife. Rather live in this world and take care of your people, your family. And that said, it's also rather radical, I would say, and that's the title of my text for the American Philosophical Association, because that text of Egypt, it actually argues that one should care more about writing and more than your own family, so to say. So the point is, it's not like the ancient Egypt either was a very static civilization. It had many ideas, and that text was written just 100 years after one of the pharaohs actually removed all the old gods in Egypt and declared a sun god as the one and only god. And then that tradition was also reversed, So rather complex thing. And it reminds me a little bit of India, because the interesting things was after the Harappas, it also became this very very complex situation in India with all the astikas and the nastikas, and this complex discussion about the universe and the world, and we have the Upanishads, and I also have some quotes here from the Rig Vedas. We can move on into the Rig Vedas if we would like that, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. But I think senior, you asked mother goddess. Actually, they are not mother goddess.
Right.
You can read this article which I have pinned. So article has been pinned which she has written. You may read that they are actually figures of women, regular women, just regular.
Yeah,
So
that's
they represent humans. Yeah.
so what is happening, and it's not only India. So my point is we are seeing this around the world, that we use our worldview today, and religions have become very important around the world, but we use this situation that we have in day, and we um, push it onto the past, and when we think that, oh, since we have temples and churches and synagogues and mosques, they also had to have it, but that's not necessarily the case, because, and that's another theory that, and we can get back to that, what Radhakrishnan mentioned as well, is in his text from 1929, or his philosophy book, is that in the beginning was atheism, in the beginning was rationality and materialism, because people were 4,000 years ago, they were probably mostly concerned about getting hold of food and trying to survive. And so one argument is that only later did religions evolve. That's to have a religion, and it takes time to write all these texts, to think about and to explain the world. It takes time, and so that's at least a theory, an argument, that in the beginning was atheism or rationality. And at least I would also say, or I write that in my text, that instead of thinking of India as the place of worship and religions, that's understandable, and I do understand why people of the world think that. But I would like to see that more people got to know that India is the place for secular, rational, material thinking. In addition to Charvaka and Lokayatas, we mentioned Aryabhata with the great mathematicians. Come on, you guys are in India. I mean, you made the numbers that we all use. We can't talk through the computer without
Sure.
The Indian mathematical tradition. You got Aryabhata, Brahmagupta, and not to mention Bhaskara II of the 1100s.
Yeah, and even you could include Hemchandra, the Jain mathematician, who actually worked on the Fibonacci series. Hemchandra.
Exactly. And you got it going on in the 1400s as well. Copernicus actually writes about this. So that's a paradox. Everybody connects India to religions these days, but personally, I think it's more correct to the more. I mean, religions is not that, how to say, special. I mean, everybody has all countries in the world have some kind of religion these days. But what is special is that it's only India that have. It's only Indians that have discovered the number 0, right? That's only India, except in the Mayas in the Mesoamerica, you know. So I mean, that's what we should discuss more.
Yeah, and one more thing I would like to mention. Remembering mathematics 1400s, I think we had something called as Kerala School of Mathematics.
Yes, exactly.
That was the medieval period.
Yeah.
So that was like a work on trigonometry and little bit of calculus, all that.
And calculus, yeah.
Yeah, that was the work around that.
Right, before Newton, right? And if it wasn't for, and then you have the Persian and Arab, of course, scholars that translated these Indian texts and brought it to Europe, and then it got globalized, you know?
Yeah. And one of the interesting things, since you mentioned about traveling to China, one of the things I have come across is the integer, the negative numbers, and the imaginary numbers. That was somewhere created in China.
Right.
And in your text, you have also gone extensively researching about China. I mean, very few scholars would actually think about this, that ancient, some materialist philosophy in China. I mean, today mostly China is known for communism, the communist state government, all that. And maybe earlier time people would have thought it's just Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism. That would have been but I mean, you wouldn't have had much of a public scope to discuss whether in past as well, before 1249, before, as you like to say, in how China any rational philosophy existed. So can you delve more deeply into this here?
Well, right. So, okay, when it comes to China, yes, we do have, for example, the work of Joseph Needham in the 1950s. He started this great work just to in the cooperation with the Chinese to just demonstrate how much China has, contributed to the science of the world. When it comes to book printing, for example, I mean, that was Chinese, So many think that, or say today, that it was like Gutenberg and the Europeans invented printing, but that is not true at all. That is from the Chinese. They started in the approximately year 1100. So a lot of this technology was from China. And another thing is, as we mentioned earlier, that also this connection between India and China is also very important. I mean, too many talk about, India and Europe and the British, but British, I mean, that's a rather, recent connection, right? So the old tradition, that's India and China. So I've, read great works like from the Chinese, like Fa Xihen. So he traveled. He worked in the year 450 approximately. He traveled from the middle of China, and he was searching for manuscripts. Okay, so that was Buddhism, but as we know, Buddhism was originally, or is is a Gnostic way of thinking, right?
Yeah, Gnostic. So it was actually non-Brahmanical, you can say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he traveled the whole way and through what is today Pakistan, and then he came along to Pune, and he studied there for years, and he brought all these manuscripts back home, traveling via Sri Lanka, and took the ship home. But he walked all the way with a couple of friends. So he walked, and he brought all these scriptures back. But again, what is not known that much is that maybe not him, but the other ones, they actually also brought Charvaka manuscripts back home to China, and people as well, So we have, like, in the middle of China, there are actually there are actual statues of some of these Charvaka people, at least. And if you can go back to that, and Ayita Kesak Ambala, or how would you pronounce its name?
Yeah, Ajit Kesh Kambli.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
correct. So I'm sorry for my pronunciation, and I have to
No,
say
it's
my
okay. It's okay.
Sanskrit is not good either. But anyways, so I think that we know this from, and I think it's also important to read the Buddhist texts, because in this rather famous text, Discourse on the Fruits of Contemplative Life, it's written in Pali, and so that's a Theravada Buddhist text, and this is the place where Ajita, as I call him, and he probably lived around the year 500, or possibly.
Yeah, around the time of Buddha.
Yeah, around that time, in the 6th century. And may I take a quote? I read a quote from him, just for at least the non-Indians to know. And he says, in this text, he's quoted as such, quote, "If you ask me whether there is another world, well, if I thought there were, I would say so, but I don't say so, and I don't think it's thus or thus." I'm sorry. I was quoting from Sanjaya
Belati Putra.
Yeah, of course. Maybe once more, when it comes to Ajita, okay? He says, "Fools prescribe alms giving, and some assert that there is such a thing as merit in alms giving, but the words are empty, false, and nonsensical. Both the fool and the wise are annihilated and destroyed after death and dissolution of their bodies. Nothing exists after death." End of quote. So that was from Ajita, right? And this is in a text from the Buddhists, right?
Yeah.
So and so it's there. And remember, we don't have anything like this in, let's say, Europe or in China. Oh, let's skip China, because they have a rather complex history as well. But we have to remember that this is something that Europe didn't, how to say, start with such a tradition until the 1800s, just a couple of 100 years ago. Because or that they said, someone would say that, okay, we have Pyrrho. So that's a so-called, not a Europe, he was a Greek. And so he was not connected to the Western European tradition, but he was a Greek traveling with Alexander the Great to India, right? And it's reported that actually Alexander the Great, according to Aryan, he met with the Indian yogis and or the gymnosophists, and he discussed with them.
Whom gymnosophists, you can refer them as shamans.
Yeah,
I mean, people who were kind of you could say something similar to Buddhists, Jains, like those type of people.
Yeah, exactly. We don't know who, but we know there are so many ideas, right? But after that travel, to India, Pyrrho brought back to Greece these ideas. It seems like, at least long after, the ancient Indian tradition. So, and then we got Epicurus as well in the Greek tradition, just a little bit more than 2,000 years ago. But Epicurus was not either. He was not like an atheist like Ajita, right? He was much more open to the gods. He was not like saying like there are no gods, there is no afterlife. He was not like that. He was a little bit more, a little bit more enjoy life,
Yeah,
So, as far as I can see, we have nothing like this Indian tradition in the rest of the world. So that's
yeah,
why it's important. This should not only be a local Indian conversation, so to say. This is a global heritage.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Also in your article, you have mentioned about the creation hymn of Rigveda as a part of the quote in your first article. It says,
Yeah,
"Who really knows? Who here proclaim it? Hence was it
exactly,
produced." So
exactly.
so can you give a background? Because one thing we know for sure that most of the language used in the Vedic text are of Indo-European in origin or Proto-Indo-European, something close to it. So we know
Yeah,
for sure that that is the language which is used in the Vedas, and we know that there has been multiple migrations to India. So can you say that originally migrants were vastly different than they came before here in India, or something else was there to add?
yeah, exactly. So, okay, so this is of course very complex, but and I just have to rely on the scholars that we have, and the texts that we do have. Um, but yes, okay. So one of the um, theories, so to say, is of course that okay. So we have this Harappan culture, and we also have the Dravidian languages, and that's one of the theories, that also this worldly secular thinking also have been connected to the Dalits. That's one of the possibilities. Also thinking about the later eras, and but when it comes to the Rig Veda, and you quoted that exactly, most likely you quoted the chapter 10.129.
Actually, yeah, it's 129 of the chapter Mandal,
Yeah,
book
chapter.
10.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm
129
sorry.
chapter
Yeah,
of the book 10, you can say.
yeah. I'm sorry. Book 10, chapter 1 to 9. Yeah, 129. And, let me just finish the quote that you got. It says, quote, "The gods came afterwards with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Question mark." End of quote. So it means, again, this is at least agnosticism, a little bit like what I quoted when it comes to Sanjaya, and it is this wondering, so to say, right? So one of the theories here is that the Vedas could come along and create some kind of discussion with the, how to say, original material atheist tradition. At least atheists are non-religious traditions, right? and and this is what we can see in the Upanishads as well. We have this, we can get back to that, but that there are these discussions when it comes to Jaina Valkya as well, um, about the world, and it seems to be a great mixture of people, immigrants. Remember, immigration is natural, I would say, and it has been to all times, at least until recent times. So it's a great mixture of people and ideas, and this mixture of people, it's very likely that spurred and ignited this debate about the universe. And the interesting thing also from the Rig Vedas is that there are these are not easy questions and no easy answers. It's discussions, and I think that this complexity is very important and very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you quoted the Upanishad. Actually, actual name, how we pronounce is Yajnavalkya, the person
No.
who performed. And
Okay.
actually, it was a debate with his wife where he
Yes.
confesses that there is no life after death. He's put into
Yes.
certain confession, and
Yes.
his wife gets confused.
Y-
She asks,
Right.
"Now you have put me in a delusion. You were saying
Right.
something else before." So yeah, that's interesting. Actually, one of our viewer has another question here. I mean, this is regarding the Vedas. The thing is, uh, you mentioned about probably 3005, but here he's asking about the archaeological evidence of the Rig Veda, actually. Because
Uh,
see, so one of the areas of research any you can suggest where, because most of the archaeology which we see
yeah.
is of Harappans and Indus Valley, actually.
Yeah. Exactly. So, okay. Remember, everything from the past when it comes to years is it's a little bit. Yeah, it might be difficult, right? And Rig Veda and archaeology, that's a little bit difficult because we don't have the original text, right? But so I'm basing my argument a little bit on this. For example, this is a selection, just is one. It's also translated by Wendy Doniger, um, who had written this other book, The Hindus, as well. And here it says, and this is penguin. So at least in Europe, penguin is like accepted as the best in Europe, when it comes to publishing. And so, according to them, the Rig Vedas are from approximately 1200 to 900 BCE, before the Common Era. So that means 3,200 years ago, approximately, right? So, but remember, these are probably written and during a long time, or it will
Yeah,
take some time. Yeah.
but I think here, at least for the viewers' sake who are watching, it would be interesting to mention that when you look at Vedas and the gods mentioned in the Vedas, they
Mhm.
more resemble with the Mitanni culture, the Mitanni civilization or the Anatolian area of the Middle East, where there are
Right.
certain places where they try to use the hymns on those gods, Vedic gods. So it resembles more of that civilization than the local Indian. I mean, it's in much later time that it might have integrated, but we know for sure Indus Valley civilization is one which is the defining feature, actually. But coming back to your time, you did mention about Buddha, but you also mentioned about Akbar. One of the more interesting things for me was
Mhm.
you have in your second part you have extensively quoted on the courts of Akbar. I mean his
Yeah.
court and what he used as intellectual. Now, most people neither in India nor in Europe are really aware of this, but you have used the atheists at the Mughal court and you give some example like what Abul Fazl wrote. Then you have given reference to Europeans. You mentioned the Jesuit Roberto di Nobili, is it? You have
Right.
mentioned. Yeah, and you have also mentioned about a 400 book page called Dabistan, and I think it's in Persian text, but what it's written
Yeah.
there you have mentioned. Yeah. So can you just go a little bit more into the research where all the sources you have collected from, and could you
Yeah.
just give an overview of that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So yeah. So because I just felt the need to correct also the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, because they are one of the ones who they write like, oh, but after the year 1100 or so, Charvaka and Lokayata just disappears, and some say, it disappears with the Muslims or something. But rather, how to say the opposite, we might see a rather vital movement after the 1300s. you know. And so, okay, we can start with Akbar, and because the thing is that he he had this this from 1578. He had this. He invited philosophers and representatives of the different worldviews to his new house, you know, or the house of worship, or Ibadat Khana, approximately, if you do understand what I'm trying to say. It's in
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Fatehpur Sikri, right?
yeah.
So every Thursday he invited people there to discuss, and it was in this and so he tried to evolve his own religion as well, you know, God's religion, or din
Yeah, Dine Ilahi.
ilahi, right? Which is also interesting, you know. It resembles, actually, from world history. I only know this about from um this this ancient pharaoh 2000 years earlier, actually, who has done something like that. But anyhow, according to this chronicler, Abul Fasl, he was born in 1551, died in 1602. So, and he was rather liberal, and so he wrote down about, you know, wrote down these discussions at Akbar's courts. And, you know, you got Hindu Brahmin, Devi was he was one of them, those who showed up, and we got the Parsi and Jains there, and Catholic Jesuits from Europe. And then, in addition, he writes in the official chronicle Akbarnama from 1602. He writes that the Charvakas were there, and he writes, and if it's okay, I will quote, because, you know, I haven't seen too many write about this earlier.
Yeah.
Not even the Charvaka scholars. I haven't
I
seen
mean,
it.
there are reasons for that, because the society was rigid in that, anything so-called rational at that time meant it's kind of offending the people's religion. So, that wasn't something very much encouraged. But always the voices were there, I guess. Voices were there. And, you can keep in mind, unlike the Buddhism and Jainism, which got the king patronage, Lokayat never got a king patronage. It never had any patronage of any king or an empire, unlike the Buddhism and the Jainism. Yeah.
Right, right. So, okay, let me just take this quote from Abul Fazl. So he writes in 1602, quote, about the Charvakas, quote, they do not believe in a god, nor in immaterial substances, and affirm faculty of thought to result from the equilibrium of the aggregate elements. They admit only of such sciences as tend to the promotion of external order, that is, a knowledge of just administration and benevolent government. They are somewhat analogous to the sophists in their views, and have written many works in reproach of others. End of quote. Okay, so I think it's a couple of interesting things here in this quote, which I haven't seen too much elsewhere. Remember, so he writes rather positive about them, right? He writes that they have knowledge of a just administration and benevolent government. So it means that, you know, in contrast, I have seen some people say, "Oh, but Charvakas, they are only interested in themselves, and, you know, drinking all the time, and don't care about society." But according to Abul Fasl, it's rather the opposite. They are rather well known for being concerned about having a good society, a just government in this world, you know. So that's one example. We also have other ones here when it comes to what the Jesuits wrote as well. But I will also, if it's okay, mention Dabistan, this other Indian text. So this is a 400-page book. Also called, Dabistan School of Religions. That's one translation. Is written about 1660, around the time of Dara Shikoh. So Dara Shikoh
Was a cousin of brother of Aurangzeb, apparently, and
yeah, right.
And he was assassinated by Aurangzeb. Actually, we know that.
Right. Tough times, but not as bad as in England. We had this English king who killed 8 wives or something. So that's tougher. Just saying. But so it was a tough time in those days as well. But anyhow, in this Dabistan book, it's credited to the Persian historian writing in Kashmiri, Musin Fani. He was born approximately in 1615. And this text discusses more than 20 philosophical and religious schools, including Charvaka. And let's see here, he devotes several pages to the Charvakas, and he called them Rupa Skanda, understood by means of the senses, as far as I can see here. But anyhow, he says that these atheists argue that, quote, the world and its inhabitants have no creator, end of quote. And Musin Fani, he was a Muslim himself, and he wrote about that, like Abu Fazl. And also he stresses the positive sides when it comes to the Charvakas. He writes, quote, about the Charvakas in Dabistan, quote, however, nobody is to hurt living beings, as by it he is liable to cause some harm to himself. It is agreed by the wise that no injury is to be done to another, by the observance of which men may be set at ease, their numbers increased, and cultivation be promoted. This is the substance of the belief of the Charvak. End of quote. So this is from 1660, and again, it refutes this claim that somebody says that, it just died out, and there were no atheists anymore. And I have a text from the 1300s that will say exactly the opposite as well. Rather, there were many Charvakas in the 1300s, according to the text. But just stick to this one from 1660s. It's really interesting because he also goes on to tell about a learned philosopher who enters a royal hall. And this philosopher criticizes the Christians, Jews, Muslims, and the Veda followers who are present. And none of them, and now I'm reading from my manuscript here, managed to beat him in the debate. And the learned philosopher argues for the adoption of the thought system of Akbar the Wise, this new religion. Yet he also states, quote, you seem not to know that the irrational cannot be the creator of the rational. And according to a European American scholar, her name is Wojciechowski. I think it's like the Polish name.
Yeah,
So
you just
yeah,
mentioned that. Let me read it out.
yeah,
It's
right,
actually Wojciechowski.
yeah. So
Wojciechowski. Yeah,
it's it's like my name. It's impossible. Yeah. But anyhow,
yeah,
um, these names are. But anyhow, so according to her, so this is the very Charvaka argument. In addition, you know, um, so that the irrational cannot be the creator of the rational. Again, so so that's yet another example, you know, on how this debate during the 1600s was also, so to say, centered at times around the Charvakas because they were challenging the religious peoples, you know, and then we have like somebody like Francois Bernier, who actually was a physician working for Daryl Shikoh, and afterwards, I guess he also worked for Aurangzeb, and he also, you know, were into these discussions also when it comes to the Charvakas.
yeah. That was interesting point. And coming back, one more thing I got to remember here.
Mm,
So while doing reading about Akbar's court, you have also mentioned in that you just read out the text. Also, many people have argued that the Charvak or the Lokayat thought process, Lokayat are mainly against only Hinduism or quote unquote the Brahmanical system. But what you just read out now, it indicates that they probably rejected all the irrational ideas. I mean, irrespective of the person, actually, based on what the reading of Dabistan.
right, exactly. I just have to clarify that I personally, I just try to treat all worldviews rather, how to say, similar. And I would say, you know, it's possible to misuse religion. It's also possible to misuse non-religion. You know, we have seen that with, you know, the Stalin regime, for example, you know, was non-religious, but it didn't help. People were killed, you know. So I'm just saying it's
Yeah,
possible to misuse several systems, you know.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Right. So I just my or that's my view that I'm trying to be balanced and seriously I think there are good among all people from all different religions and worldviews and stuff. Uh, that said, you know, when it comes to the secular rational thinking, it is very interesting and very important for people to know that this is a very old tradition in India, possibly the oldest one, actually, you know, before the religions.
yeah. One of the oldest in the world, you can say.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, yeah, what was the question again? But I
Yeah,
was thinking I can mention more about when it comes to also the European and the Chinese connection as well. That's
yeah,
one.
sure, sure. Uh,
But
can you do mention the Chinese scholar who has written any recent research? I
right.
mean, kind of tongue twister for me. So just can you give a brief on that? Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So this was a text I, how to say, came along, and I haven't seen it in any among the Indian scholars, or not only the Indian Charvaka scholars, but also, you know, the American and European ones as well. So, um, so his name is, let me try. As usual, I probably won't get it perfect, but Wang Xin Shuan. Wang Xin. So it was published in Chinese in 1978, and there was an English version published in the quarterly journal Social Sciences in March 1981. 1981. And its name of the article is Lokayata and its influence in China. So Huang, he lists actually 62 different classical texts in China that
Wow.
referred to these Indian material thinking traditions, or
So
actually
so so
Lokayata.
here I think for most people who have a doubt that why we don't find the text on Lokayat here in India, I
Yeah,
think that explains that all of this got exported to China. Maybe.
yeah, that's one exactly. That's a good point. And I just also have to say, we haven't gotten to mention it, but we actually do have one primary source of Lokayata Charvaka thinking. That is the text by Yayara,
Jairasi Bhatt.
right, around the
Yeah.
year 800, and it
Yeah.
was rediscovered only 1940. So rather recent texts as well. So it's rather recent, and so there is some discussion whether he is a Charvaka or not. But Ethan Mills, he has listed um, this book by him um, as a Charvaka text, or he has this book with Naguruyana around the year 200, and Jayarasi around 800, and Sri Harissa around 1100.
Yeah.
So he lists them as skeptical thinkers.
Yeah.
Skeptical. That's another word. Um,
And you can include even Nagarjun as another kind of skeptical.
yeah,
Nagarjun.
yeah, yeah. That was a try to say Naguriyana. Um,
Yeah.
uh,
Nagarjun.
exactly. Like
Yeah.
you say it. I'm sorry about that. But
It's okay.
anyhow,
It's okay. It's okay.
yeah. So exactly. So that was those three that Ethan Mills, this American scholar, he has written about these skeptical thinkers of India, three of them, and one of them is Yayarasi. So that's a very good text that explains the primary the thinking from a primary source. But let's just go back to Huang from China. I think he's still alive. He was that at least a couple of years ago, and
Yeah. Yeah.
he has 62 classical texts, and he starts with the uh, Brahma
Brahmajala Sut.
Brahmayala Sutra. It
Yeah. That
was
is from the Tripitak actually.
exactly. So it
Yeah.
was translated actually already in the 200s, which is rather surprising because that means in case that yeah, that was actually before Buddhism came along to India as well. But he at least has some examples there, and he from that text, and then he also um, has an explanation for Brahmajala Sutra written by
Yeah.
Yi Guan. So that was in the 1500s, around 1550.
The
So in
Ming
the
Dynasty.
exactly. So
Yeah.
that's during 1300 years. In China, we have examples of this influence. And it has
Yeah.
to be said, that also the Chinese tradition is rather, how to say, multicultural. I mean, we got Confucius or Confucius, but
Confucius
we also
Taoism.
right, and then we got Taoism with scholars like Shuangxi and um, and Lao Tzu,
yeah,
and this mixture, and then it mixes with Buddhism as well,
yeah.
and Taoism as well is a rather secular way of thinking about the world. Often the yeah, it's complex because remember things changes, during time, and then it get influenced, so it's a little bit
Yeah.
complex. But anyhow, so um, and actually, just to make it even more complex, so Huang actually also mentions four texts on Lokayata in Chinese, but it's actually written by Japanese Buddhist writers. You know, that that
Yeah.
means that according to this, I mean, Charvaka has traveled to the Japanese as well. You know,
I mean, that's incredible, and I don't remember a YouTube channel where this has been even mentioned. I mean,
I
Indians
don't
even
think so.
don't know about this.
Exactly.
Indians themselves, yeah,
Yeah, so this is my, how to say, global comparative perspective. I think we should
yeah,
expand. And in the end of my text, I also argue that maybe we should look at even further. When it comes to, for example, Indonesia,
yeah.
because and Cambodia. In Indonesia, by the way, so I have been to Angkor, Angkor Wat is in Cambodia, and in
Borobudur, is it you're mentioning?
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, and at the island of Java, I've been to one of these great, how to say, Indian temples. And yes,
Yeah,
as we know, talking about Hindu, the Veda script. I mean, the Vedas, um, there is like Samkhya, we can talk about that as well, but how
yeah.
Samkhya and the other traditions, except Adi Shankara's Vedanta, they all
Yeah.
have some kind of,
Atheistic tendency.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And this is not me saying it. I have the quotes from the 1400s as well, whatever, saying this.
yeah.
And when it comes to Cambodia and Indonesia, they are also countries that have been influenced by the Indian thinking, and it's also possible that we can find something there. I haven't checked yet. I haven't gotten to it.
So here is one question by the viewer. How did all of this got lost from India? I mean, where
Yeah.
we have to rely on the opponent's, uh, opponent's statements in order to refute that philosophy. I mean, that's the
Well,
status here currently.
yeah. Well, first of all, did it really get lost? That's my question back, because
Yeah,
my claim is maybe it didn't get lost. You know, maybe it
yeah,
has been there all along. So, because let me, yeah, we do have, for example, during the 1800s. I have some examples there when it comes to, but then we are in the modern era. So, of course, it can be influenced from other parts of the world as well. But, it started in India. But what Pule and the Dalit leader, what he did, and his
yeah.
wife, that was to, you know, go back to the Lokayata thinking and the
Yeah,
Charvaka. So,
I think you were referring to the Gulab Das movement and
exactly.
Piru Preman, and I think Jyotiba Phule and his wife Savitri Bai Phule.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and let me see. Wait, I talking about China. Just to skip back to China, just to get that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
finished a little bit. But so what's interesting is there that Huang, he explains how the Buddhists regarded the Lokayatikas as fellow travelers of the
Yeah.
Confucian and the Taoist schools. And there were discussions, in the 600s and the 700s, and actually, Chinese scholars came to Nalanda, the Nalanda, the university.
Yeah, the famous university.
Right. And who did they meet? They met Charvakas there, and they ended
Yeah,
up in a discussion.
yeah,
Actually, a little bit of fighting as well. So
yeah.
it's not only these days that there are conflicts, but at least we have another scholar here, because Huang he cites Rasik Vihari.
Rasik Vihari Joshi.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And he wrote in
7.
1987, or I'm sorry, I meant to say that, like Huang, also Rasik Vihari Yoshi noted in 1987, dozens of texts where Chinese classical works describe Lokayata, either as
Yeah,
Shi Yan Xing. So they
yeah,
call it, in China, it's called Qi Yan Xing. Means
yeah.
doctrine prevail,
Prevailing in the world.
right? Or Wu Ho Qilun, doctrine of denying afterlife.
Afterlife.
You know?
Also, there is another thing. It mentions Lu Ka Ye Jin.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. The
yeah,
Lokayata Sutra. Example,
yeah,
Luka Ye Yin, as you said, right? You
yeah,
see, it resembled Lokayata, right?
yeah,
And remember, Lokayata was probably, most likely, the original first name of this of these
school,
schools. Because I
school.
have to say, remember schools, right? Because as far as we know, Krishna del Torusu, he has written about that. He's a young scholar, and he has written, that there were several different, so to say, secular, rational Charvaka Lokayata schools, and Jayarasi belonged to one of them. Ethan Mills said,
Yeah.
has argued.
At
You
least,
know,
as per another scholar, Dakshin Ranjan Shastri, as per him, actually, there were 4 different types of branch within it. So they had slightly
right?
different disagreement. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. And here is one question. Any idea how Buddhist ended from India? I mean, this is also one of the topic along with this.
yeah.
Because when we read Tarak, it's natural that uh, most of the time when rational philosophies come, somehow they have associated themselves with those movements which are somewhat non-Brahmanical. So they went with Buddhists, they went with Jains, they went with some other. So any idea about the Buddhist which ended in India or it transformed?
Well, yeah, it's complex, and I'm probably not the correct person to ask here, but I just want to say that, yeah, well, much happened after Adi Shankara, and I just have to mention that Shankara, he also wrote about Charvakas and
Yeah,
Lokayatas.
yeah,
He does it. Panini, we haven't gotten to mention him. I don't know how much time you got, but Panini, the great Indian grammar scholar, he wrote approximately 400 years before the Common Era, 2,400 years ago, and he also wrote about defines the Lokayatikas,
yeah.
and we also got the Arthashastra. Do I have the Arthashastra? It's a great book, actually. Like this is the best translation that I know of Olivel.
Oh,
This, so
yeah,
and it is actually, and that book is actually, my translation is dedicated to Braspati.
yeah.
So this is, and Braspati is a name for one of the most famous Charvakas,
Yeah.
or
Or at least the founder of it. At
yeah,
least.
but remember, that's a little bit foggy, so to say, right? But
Yeah,
how
yeah,
Buddhism, yeah, it's complex when it comes to Buddhism. Uh, yeah, but much happened after 800, and some argue, that yes, the Veda after Shankara that got more, how to say,
Aggressive.
influential. Yes, but yeah, it's rather complex. May I just finish off, or
Yeah, in another five
the
minutes we'll be
Chinese,
finishing off.
yeah,
Yeah.
or
So
just the Chinese part? Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
Chinese part was interesting, but you have
Okay.
also mentioned the Sangam literature, Buddhist text of Mani Mekkalai. I mean, very few people have talked about Dravidian in Tamil Nadu, about atheism, but in your
Yeah.
blog you have mentioned that.
Yes. Yeah. So that's another thing to consider, the Tamil tradition. That said, and while I'm at it, I just want to mention that, you know, um, we also have the poet Vemana. Vemana. So he's a
Yeah, yeah.
Telugu poet. So
Vemana, Vemana.
yeah. So, in there is actually a Charvaka ashram, founded
In
in
Andhra,
1970.
yeah. That was
Right.
built in 1973.
Yeah, right. So it's like in Andhra Pradesh in Nidamaru, but he actually has, or they have, a statue of the poet Vemana and the Dalit couple, Jyotirao Phule and Savi.
Jyotirao Phule and Savitri Bai Phule.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. And so that's the Dalits, and yeah, but yes, there are also Tamil play, which is mentioning and discussing these the Charvakas as well, you know. And we do have it, as you might know, in the Mahabharata as well. While I'm at it, and Ramayana, I haven't gotten to mention that.
Yeah,
Um,
but I think if you look at the literature, I think you would assume that the Tamil literatures are probably more secular compared to any other in Indian history. I mean, the focus has been entirely on your day-to-day life, about good life, moral ethics. So that has been probably more secular, and you would expect more of Charvakas there. But and in fact, there are references as well. You mentioned about a girl who was asked to choose among the
yeah,
three different schools, and she chooses the one which is materialist.
yeah,
It was
exactly.
yeah,
I'm trying to find, because I need to check my pronunciation about that play. So I have to think about it. But while I'm at it, I also mention another one that we haven't gotten to, and that's Madhavara. Madhava Kari. Uh,
मूल मध्यम कारिका सर्वदर्शन संग्रह.
yeah, also named possibly Vidyaranya around the year in the third.
बृहद्राण्यक.
So yeah, because he was the one who wrote Sarva Darsana Samgraha.
या सर्वदर्शन संग्रह. Yeah.
Uh, exactly, thank you. So in English, that would be the anthology of all philosophies, right? Something
Yeah.
like that. And that's really that's such a unique text, and I think it's really tremendous, because so he was actually a Advaita Vedanta scholar, as far
Yeah.
as we know, and he writes about 16 different philosophical schools in India.
Yeah. And he
And
starts with Charvak.
exactly. And he starts with Charvak. And the interesting thing is that, he doesn't write about it to refute the Charvaks, right? He writes about it in a so-called objective, neutral way, as good as it seems like to me, at least, And he does that with the other schools as well. So he reminds me a little bit about of Radha Krishnan, in 1929. You know, I mean, because he tries to give a so-called objective presentation. That's at least my impression. And just let me quote here what he writes about the Charvakas. So he uses, 7 pages at least, some pages, and he says that the Charvakas held that there is no, quote, there is no other hell than mundane pain, and that, quote, the soul is identical with the body, and that they are denying the existence of any object belonging to a future world. And this is another interesting point here, talking about why did it disappear, and did it really disappear? Because according to him, it was actually opposite. The Charvakas was a belief system for the masses. So he says, or writes, quote, the efforts of Charvaka are indeed hard to be eradicated, for the majority of living beings hold by the current refrain, quote, while life is yours, live joyously. None can escape death's searching eye. When once this frame of ours they burn, how shall it ever again return? End of quote. So, and this is rather interesting. He writes that this is the belief system of the people, and remember the word lokayata as well.
Yeah.
It might be worldly, but it might also be
People.
of the people, right? So
Yeah.
this is the people religion, so to say, the people belief system. I mean, if you don't have time to develop a religion, but you only have to toil the soil and
Day in, day out. Yeah.
day in day out, so you don't have time to do all this philosophy thing, right? So why not
Yeah.
believe in the world as it is, as we see it with our own eyes, right?
Yeah.
And this is what he argues. So according to Madhavacharya, he writes, quote, the mass of men denying the existence of any object belonging to a future world are found to follow only the doctrine of Charvaka. Hence, another name for that school is Lokayata, a name well accordant with the thing signified. End of quote. Right? So, see here, it's not us saying it, it's him. He says, hence another name for that school is Lokayata, because the mass of man. So it
Yeah.
means like, and this is in the 1300s, right?
Yeah.
But according to all encyclopedicas, it disappeared in the
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
Shankara. But no, it didn't. Not according to this text from the 1300s, right?
Yeah.
And he says also, and he concludes his first chapter on the atheists by stating, quote, hence in kindness to the mass of living beings must we fly for refuge to the doctrine of Charvaka. Such is the pleasant consummation, end of quote. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we have the proof, right? It didn't, according to him. So, but remember, it might be that Madhavacharya, that he, how to say, made it, he exaggerated. That might be a point, of course, not that the majority of people in the 1300s belong to the Charvakas, but it's a little bit like it's part of everything. It seems like it's part of every single epic in Indian tradition.
Actually, the main, the reason why it became so important was, if you had to establish a school, you had to refute. If you couldn't refute it, your the religious ideas cannot be propagated. You need to
Right.
show yourself better than them, so it was natural for them to like keep a refutation of it. I think this has been a great session, and I hope viewers do like it. They do like share this live, and you know they probably
Yeah.
show it to more people, and hopefully there is a lot of enlightening things to gain from this session, because a lot of things which is never even talked about or even discussed in, say, the mainstream, so that has been brought out here,
Right.
various aspects of it. And what I do think is the bhakti movement which happened in South and North India is probably the biggest reason of kind of reduction or kind of backtrack of this movement, actually, because
Yeah.
bhakti movement required surrender to the supreme power, and probably that became the norm over a period of time. Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. Okay, yeah, because the Bhakti movement was around, yeah, from 1100s and so on. Yes, so
yeah,
yeah, that's possible. And but again, remember, like this text from Madhava Acharya,
yeah,
he says that all people were Charvakas in the 1300s.
yeah.
And,
So yeah, that's a good point. One more thing to keep in mind is like, uh, the people were busy. I mean, he will be keeping from that point, but we see over a period of time. I mean, if the best way we can conclude this session is, we could say there has been a materialistic devolution. Materialism hasn't evolved, in fact it has devolved, and idealism has evolved, I would rather say, in Indian context.
yeah, well, and maybe in a global context as well. Yes, maybe we are more religious today, it seems like to me, than
Yeah,
we have been, maybe more than we were 1,000 years ago.
yeah, because if you look at back in 1800s, Islam was only 10%, Christianity was only like around 9%, Hinduism 12%, 1800s. Today it has all like plummeted. Yeah, I mean, I think we can conclude that, as we said. So I think it has been a great session, and I would like to have one more in the future as well. And I hope you
Yeah,
would oblige.
and
So, viewers, please like, share, comment, subscribe for such sessions. And I hope you all have enjoyed this fruitful discussion. Lots of things to learn, lots of new things have been revealed here and known, which is not usually discussed. So, here is a vote of thanks from Kshitij. He says, thanks to Mr. Herbjørnsrud for a great session, and he also says thanks sir for the session. Yeah, so
uh,
thanks viewers, and have a very good night. Yeah,
yeah,
bye. I'll be
shukriya,
just
shukriya mere dost,
thanks, that
shukriya
was a good Hindi.
mera dost.
Yeah, that's very good. On a good
ठीक
note,
है,
yeah, have a nice and happy weekend on a good note. Yeah.
बाय बाय.